Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Grande Bouffe.
The big feast. You really gave that one an interesting tone. I like it, Cole. Keep it going with that. The sultry sounds of Le Grande Bouffe.
Where, as always, we're here to copiously consume international politics and culture through the prism of a single film and a different craft beer each week. This week, we are especially honored to have the one and only Mr. Michael Somerville on the show. If you ever saw that show Wingman, which I personally love, my wife and I used to watch that show all the time, then you know who Michael Somerville is. He's been on Letterman a bunch of times. And what else? He wrote a column. Do you still do that column?
No,
for
but
Glamour?
Glamour Magazine's Jake. Yeah, but that was a 3-year gig. It was great.
So here we are with Mr. Michael Somerville to discuss the movie that Michael has chosen for us, Caddyshack.
Thank you for having me, guys.
It's a pleasure.
Thank
It's a
you.
pleasure.
We're under two mics deep for today.
I'm intimidated. This is a serious film discussion group, and when you first asked me, I said, all right, well, what's my favorite movie? Well, the honest answer is Caddyshack, but I feel like you guys are working at a higher level than that, and you're like, nope, bring it.
Well, and I got to choose the beer, which, I thought for Michael Somerville, Sierra Nevada's SUMMERFEST
could not be more perfect.
Would go well. And I did a little research, and I know that Michael really likes lagers, and so this is a crisp, light lager. Let's see what's the ABV on this. It's not too dangerous. 5%, so a good
perfect
day drinking beer, which is what we're doing.
For Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah, we're giggly. Cole's doing weird intros because we already recorded one episode today, so we're flying high. And I think this is a perfect stage to talk about an American comedy classic,
Caddyshack, which came out. What year was it? It was
1980.
Oh, I thought it was 79.
1980. Well, but it shot in 79, I think.
Okay.
Released in 80, I believe.
Yeah, I love that year. It was a great year. I loved being alive. It was
a really Saturday Night Live heyday.
Oh yeah,
time, and there's a lot of Saturday Night Live stuff going on.
That's exactly. Bill Murray was flying down from New York to shoot it down to Florida. He would fly down.
He was still on the cast 4 years because it was 76 that shit started, right? And he's still on. But Chevy Chase had peace.
He was done.
He's mad peace.
Yes.
This was his film
Post
career.
Foul Play.
Foul Play already came out. Had Fletch come out?
Fletch had not come out yet, right? That was 80, 80 something.
Not yet.
And Stripes came out after this, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
and that's, Bill Murray really took off after this.
Bill earning his stripes, as it were. And National Lampoon's Vacation is still a couple years away.
All to come, exactly. Yeah. Now, this was really, I think, the jumping off point for the movie. By the way, I just find it hysterical that we're talking about it in these terms with a serious tone of voice. Now, what? This was the
political and cultural.
I have to come clean and say that I saw Michael at Caroline's about a week and a half ago.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, it was wonderful. You were hilarious. So much fun. That was a great night of entertainment and comedy. But you said something early, in the show about how times have changed. And, back at the time, in the days that this movie was made, if you were on the Tonight Show or any of these, talk shows, that was it, man. You got into you got your sitcom, you got everything rolling. And it's not like that anymore.
No, you used to be. Carson was the big ticket. You got on Carson, he gave you the thumbs up or asked you to the couch, and boom, you had a sitcom the next day. Lived happily ever after.
I think that's Roseanne Barr's story.
It's Roseanne, Drew Carey.
Yeah.
Seinfeld was on a bunch, but many people have launched that way.
Roseanne sticks out to me because I remember her talking about her story on Marin or something, and she performed maybe 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
In the Midwest, came out and did. I suppose it would have been Carson, though it could.
It was Tonight Show. Yeah.
It was a Tonight Show.
Yeah.
And they were like, "We love it. Give her a show."
Right.
Wild stuff.
Right. Yeah.
It's
As
the
Carson
Wild
would
West.
say, wild stuff.
Wacky, wild stuff coming out from this Roseanne character.
But it's true. There was only so many. There wasn't internet the way we have. There was satellite radio, all this stuff today. It was just like 3 networks, really. Those are your choices to watch. One of 3 channels on TV, more or less. And so everyone in the world watched, or everyone in the country watched Carson. And if you did well, you were set. And it's not like that anymore.
You didn't have to be your own marketing team, your own video production team, your own makeup and hair team.
Producer, and no, you just had to be funny. Imagine that. Just doing what you want to do. Yeah. Not anymore. Boy, look at what we're doing right now. We're just creating anyone.
How did Rodney Dangerfield? Because I know he has a really interesting story, and for me, I mean, every time he's on the screen in this movie, I can't stand it. He's so funny.
It's so funny, right? Yeah, Rodney was my favorite all time. Like, he was my first comedy album, everything.
So, really?
He was growing up. I think it's the reason I became a comedian, because I just watched that and said, "Oh my God, that guy!" And he was, he was the star of the film. I mean, he was the big name amongst them all, between Bill Murray, Ted Knight, and Chevy Chase. He was actually the name that they all, I can't wait to see this guy work, because he was already, pounding it out and doing well. He'd been on the Tonight Show a million times, all that stuff. But that was the funny thing about the movie. If you know that it was supposed to be about the caddies. That was the whole point of the movie.
That guy Danny, who you don't remember?
Danny Noonan. Exactly. It's supposed to be about him and the other caddies.
He's like the straight man.
Exactly. And then they cast these 4 powerhouse comedians, Murray, Knight, and Chevy and Rodney, and that was it. They during production, they said, those guys are too funny. We have to steer this thing. And but Rodney, I'm with you. I could watch that man read the phone book.
I know a little backstory on him. Is he really hadn't been in that many movies, and so he came on set, and they called action the first time, and he did the entire scene. But that's not how you film a movie, because he walks around the whole set. He's talking to the wall. He's going around. And they're like, Ronnie, we called cut. Like, we need to move the camera, so you can't just do it. And he's like, it's like kind of embarrassed.
Well, the great story I heard about, a couple of stories about him on the set. I believe it was his first real movie.
There's a lot. Is before. This is the theme of this podcast. Is this was before that movie. Right?
This is before.
Before Back to School, which was
Back to School, exactly. Easy Money, all that stuff. The first time, his first date, never been in a movie, didn't know anything about him, and they called action, and he was just standing there, and they said action, and finally I said, I need action, action, and he goes, oh, do the bit. And then, like you say, he would do this stuff, and he would think the first day he would just had the flop sweat, so he was dying up there, and they said, what's wrong? He said, nobody's laughing. Right. And they said, it's a movie, we can't laugh. We're supposed to, we're going to ruin the sound if anyone laughs. He goes, yeah, but the crew's not laughing either. Like, no, they can't laugh. We're going to kill So that's how he learned movies.
He's so interesting. He's middle-aged when he hit it. He started doing comedy as a much younger man, totally failed, got involved in this sort of like weird aluminum siding
shady
criminal enterprise that he became state's witness for, and then changed his name to Rodney Dangerfield and became who he is. Yeah,
you know your stuff. Yeah, a little bit of shady action going on, and then discovered the no respect and that whole hook. And next thing you know,
but he was playing the part, because when you're going to call yourself Dangerfield,
right? Exactly.
He's rolling with it.
Exactly. Yeah. What a great. Exactly. But it's. Boom. You just, like you say, it's a tornado. You just, any scene you turn on, and just like,
hey everybody, we're all gonna get laid.
Right? How would you like to make $14 the hard way?
when I got my first apartment in San Diego, I was going to San Diego State in 81, and my first apartment was with this guy Carl, and he was the Caddyshack. He was Bill Murray. So that's what he did. He rode around the little cart all day, and
I love it.
Killed gophers. Evidently, no one knows that cats kill gophers. Did you know that?
I did not know.
Everyone acts like that's beyond their pay grade. But cats,
really,
yeah, but cats are really into killing gophers. They'll sit outside that hole. All they needed was get some good big Maine Coons or Savannahs and just let them run wild.
I'm gonna go and say that there's some even more standard gopher killing techniques that were not employed in this film. We skip straight to the cruel and unusual.
Well, the explosions at the end of the movie, they actually did them on the golf course. They triggered these explosions, and part of the deal was the people who own the golf course said, we can do the movie here, you can't blow stuff up on our golf course. So to get around it, the day they were shooting that, one of the producers took all the owners out to lunch away from the golf course as a thank you so much, we've had a great time. And that's when they ran in and shot all the explosion scenes.
That's insane.
And they say it was so there was such a huge explosion that you could, like, the airport pilots called in from the airport saying they think they witnessed a crash because there was such a huge explosion in the sky. But they got the shot.
Well, that's what's important is they got this shit.
Exactly.
Even Harold Ramis was a little shady.
First directing job ever. First time he ever directed was that movie.
Wow.
Yeah.
And does he have a little cameo in it? Is he in it at all? Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know. But he'd already done Animal House, and that's how they pitched it. They pitched it as Animal House on a golf course, and he got the approval because he brought in some other ideas, some dark comedy about Nazis and some other stuff to the studio, and they no, and then he said Animal House on a golf course, and they said game on.
It's such a story of a production that should have failed. Is on set you got people who are improvising and they just totally change the plot and they're just throw it out, and you watch it and you're like, yeah, this movie makes no sense.
It makes no sense, no.
But it's perfect.
There's something about it.
And the famous scene between Chevy Chase and Bill Murray, that was improvised. I think they needed to have, you've got Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford or whatever, you got to get them in the scene together.
Exactly.
And so they just created that great scene.
That's what they say, yeah. Two rock stars on the set, you can't not have them interact, and it does not propel the story in one way. It just, but they went to lunch that day. They're like, we need a scene with you two. They went to lunch and talked about what they should do and thought of that. But Murray didn't have one scripted line that entire movie. All his lines were improvised. Yeah,
I can't understand how these two SNL
can't make movies like that anymore.
No,
they improvised the scene where they did a bunch of drugs and got drunk together. How did they come up with that?
How can you possibly fathom that?
What life experience could they have shared?
all of those weeks on Saturday Night Live, writing bits together and performing them every Saturday night. How could they possibly have done that? Yeah.
Like as Senator Al Franken, like epic SNL writer, was asked at some point by a person who was too conservative to know what was what, if he had ever been around drug use. And he was like, well, I was a writer on SNL in the 70s. So I think I've seen more cocaine go up noses than most people know exists in the world or something like that.
I believe it.
This is a great year for comedy. The Blues Brothers came out in the same year.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a golden era year.
Yeah.
For SNL comedy teams.
Absolutely.
Ganging up on the big screen.
Yeah. And I think the studios loved them because they weren't that expensive to produce. It wasn't big over the top, anything. It was just people being funny. So I think the budget for Caddyshack was $4 million or something. I mean, something insanely low. Yeah.
All you need to just blow up a golf course against the wishes of its owners, and you're golden.
Exactly. The story I never got any more. It's hard to get any info on it. Is the whole feud between Bill Murray and Chevy Chase? They apparently had a fight on the set of SNL and had don't like each other, and there was but you can't get anything out of either of them on that. No one will talk about what it was and what actually happened.
You think they buried that hatchet by the time this
No, the word was no. That was why they were saying this is a big deal to have them working together.
The word is to 2017. It's kind of no. I mean, Chase left that crew after the first year, right?
Yeah,
and was just sort of considered
I
himself
guess
larger than anyone.
The real word is that Chevy Chase, not a friendly person.
Is that right?
That's what my understanding. This is what I've heard.
I've heard that, and I've heard otherwise. I think it's complicated.
And Bill Murray, friendly person.
Definitely.
I don't know.
Well, I could see that. I mean, he pops up all the time in New York City.
If you've got a bar mitzvah in Milwaukee on the right day.
My favorite Bill Murray story, he was in the middle of nowhere, Idaho, or just some crazy thing, doing what he does, just taking off, driving, whatever. And he goes into a diner in, middle of nowhere, and goes over to a woman's table and grabs her French fries and takes a huge bite and just looks at her and goes, "Nobody will believe you," and walks out.
He's they should write him into American Gods, the Neil Gaiman book about demigods in America, and just be so this is Thor, and this is Jupiter, and this is Bill Murray. Because he is like that. He is a demigod in America. Everyone has some he's our trickster god. He's our Raven of Native American culture.
I think he'd like to hear that.
I'll send him word.
You've got these improv masters because Dangerfield could just work. He could just walk into a room and work the hell out of it until he was tired and walk out.
Absolutely.
But it's a very specific kind of comedy, which is very different.
More Don Rickles-y kind of comedy, insult comedy.
Yeah.
Which is a lost art, I have to say.
It's kind of usually self-directed, but he's actually very pointed in this. Yeah, I remember he says to the wife of one of the villain, basically, like, "Oh, look at her! You must have been a real beauty back before electricity.
You must have been something before electricity." Exactly.
He's a bit more. Yeah, he is a bit more insulty than normal. Normally, he's talking about his proctologist thinking his face is his asshole and things like that.
Yeah. Well, that was the character, though. That's what they have for him, and I guess his character was based on a real guy, I think, in New York that the writers knew. And he just was one of these like larger than life, had a horn that made all his cars, just had a crazy obnoxious horn that got everyone's attention. He wore colorful clothes. He somehow had money and no one could quite figure out where and how it came. And and Rodney said, I think I can play this role.
He's the nouveau riche to the sort of establishment of the club, right? And it turns out that he's there. We haven't really gotten into it. I don't know if we need to, but this is somewhat of the plot, right? Is that he's trying to buy the club. They're like, "You'll never be a member here," and he's like, "A member? I don't want to be a member. I want to buy it."
I'm really enjoying your impression, by the way.
I'm like 1.5 beers deep. I'm like impressing myself.
I can't wait to see what happens after 2.
Yeah, and Ted Knight just can't stand it. He's wound. That guy's wound so tight in this movie, and he's so perfect at playing a tightly wound, rich prick.
Just absolutely, yes, absolutely. Everything by the book, and this is the way you should act, and this is the way you should be. Yep. And the whole world's coming at him. From his nephew Spalding to Rodney to
Spalding's the guy who's always like just trying to hit a ball. He's like, "Shit,
yeah,
farts,
double turns,
double farts, double turns." Yeah.
I'm playing tennis today. You're playing golf, and you'll like it. It's just it's so funny because like you say, I mean, tough to make a movie like this, but so dangerously close to just caricatures or stereotypes. These like kind of stock characters. That's the rich guy, and here's the wild card. I mean, you could sit down and write that very not in a good way. Just like, oh, here we get it, all the hacky. But and then every one of those characters fills it though, and doesn't seem trite.
And close to being one of these epic failures of a movie where you need like an oral history to unpack like how did this go so awry, like, well, we had a script and then people wanted to do something else, but it's not, it holds together, but it's also it's a brilliant way to make a movie. Is like, all right, we're going to improvise it, we're going to go in whatever direction it comes, and we're going to jump off this place, we're going to jump off like what would be an all right movie, right?
Yeah.
Like if you cast middle of the road, just sort of character actors that were not the greatest of their generation, like comedians and improvisers, it'd be an okay movie, but we'd never be talking about it right now.
And the way the music, the song, that ridiculously infectious song that you just can't get out of your head once it's there, and the little animatronic gopher. All of that stuff just it works. It just ties it all together and sets such a great tone.
And the weird thing about that, they always talk about who should have been cast or what you remember. Harold Ramis approached Pink Floyd to do the music for the song initially. It was right after The Wall, and they said no, thank you. Mm-hmm. And Don Rickles was going to play the Rodney character.
I mean, it's funny you brought it up. Like I think it could have worked.
It could have, but would we be talking about it right now?
I don't know.
Would it be the same?
I don't know. I mean,
I don't think so because there's just something about I don't know, Dangerfield. There's something about his physical bearing that's it's very different from Rickles. Rickles is like the little guy who comes in and he's wringing his hands and he's going to do the thing, but Dangerfield's just bouncy. He's just bouncy.
There's an energy,
He's a buffoon, in sort of like the technical way of like a buffoon of being someone who's like, making fun of the king and is like, just this over-the-top character, but one that you can really get on board with.
Absolutely. You're on his side, you like him, and there's a likability that I would say Don Rickles is not unlikable by any means, but there's like you say, just an energy, a youthful, kid-like way about Rodney that you're just going to rooting for him. Where I think Don's more like an adult.
Right, exactly. Because it's like in this movie, and kind of always his character is like a 8-year-old boy who came into $3 billion.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly.
My favorite Don Rickles story is he was in a restaurant, New York restaurant. He walks into a restaurant with his girlfriend. He sees Frank Sinatra sitting at his table with his boys, and he goes over and so he's sitting there with his girlfriend. He's got this younger girlfriend, hot girlfriend, and he tells the waiter, "Hey, if you get a chance, can you go over and just tell Frank that my girlfriend would like to meet him." And so, the waiter passes the word, and Frank's trying to get his attention, ignoring him through the whole meal. And then finally, at the end, he walks over to Frank, and he's like, "What are you doing? Can't you see I'm with the girl?"
Exactly. Leave me alone.
Yeah, Don Rickles played with fire. He played with the real power, and he was sort of the sort of up and comer challenger to the throne that was undercutting them, where Rodney's always playing with fucking the dipshits that are in charge, you want Rodney versus Trump, where Rickles is undercutting the real kings who should be in charge. He's
yeah. Well, I think that, the interesting thing to me, you talk about how, you let him run and you just let them run around and improvise and Ramis being his first directing job and all. And one of the smart things the producers did was got it out of Hollywood. They didn't want to shoot in L.A. or around Hollywood because they knew they would be watched very closely.
The suits would be there's a lot of drugs.
Exactly. And then, it's too much micromanaging. And so they wound up shooting it in Florida. And one of their arguments, the way they sold it to the suits was we need to get away from palm trees and stuff. It shouldn't look like, we're in Southern California. Coincidentally enough, the golf course they did book had nothing but palm trees. So but they were far from Hollywood so they could make their mistakes.
The dailies didn't get there that quick.
No, exactly. Especially back in 1979 or whatever. But yeah, I think that probably went a long way to saving them, some time and keeping, because the word is it's lore, no one's validated it, but they say when the first day Harold Ramis went to shoot, look in the camera, they say he looked in the wrong end of the camera, literally. That's and everyone's like, what are we about to do here? Yeah. So I think they were wise to be far from Hollywood and the guys paying the bills.
Ramis is interesting, right? Because he's in that circle. He's one of he's one of the Ghostbusters.
Sure.
He's on camera a bit, but for the most part, he's the behind the camera genius.
Yeah.
The sort of secret SNL cast member, not really, but of that milieu. And he made this the so much of the legacy of these classic comedies.
Yeah. Well, he co-wrote most of them, Animal House, Caddyshack. He was the writer on all this stuff. People, a lot of people didn't realize until he passed away when you looked up what he did. That's the guy from Ghostbusters. No, that's actually the guy from a lot of things that you love.
And Bill Murray's brother, who does have a small part in this.
Joel. Is it Joel in this one?
Brian Doyle Murray.
Brian Doyle. There's a Joel, there's a Brian Doyle. Yeah, it's Brian Doyle in this one. Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. And he's total straight man. Yeah. Complete straight man in the movie.
Yeah.
Is Brian Doyle, or is it Joel? I think it's Brian Doyle does a lot of the Who's Line, right? Is he on
I don't know that.
It's one of the Murrays is often in the traveling Who's Line show. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Speaking of those guys, I just saw them. I went to an event last week, a Jerry Lewis fundraiser, and those two Who's Line guys were there, Colin Mockery and
Ryan,
not Ryan Stiles.
Is it Jeff Davis now? Or?
No, Adam something, and Colin Mockery. It's two of the guys from the main show that was on with Drew Carey, but it was wild to watch because the crowd was terrible, and these guys were up there. They were just silence, and it was really crazy to watch, famous people, people who are professional and got paid well to fly to New York to host this thing and just up there eating it, but committed and staying with it. And as a comedian, it was fun to watch. Fun to watch in that. I was like, that's good for me to see that at every level, there's bad nights. And
you know who invented Who's Line? This
probably the British.
Mike Myers.
Is that right?
Mike Myers went to London in 1985 or something. and started, like everyone, you start just like your little group. They started an improv group called Whose Line Is It Anyway? Soon became detached from it, but it turned into this like multi-continental, like just celebrity-filled,
Really
epic thing. Yeah. He was talking about it on a podcast. So maybe someone else will claim the same thing, but that's what he says is that is his group. It's interesting because it is most people. Speaking of improv, which this movie is full of, that I think is to today's audiences, most people's introduction to improv comedy is this theater sports style, improvisational comedy.
Yeah. Well, and those guys are so impressive because, I mean, what they do is like you live, and obviously you're watching it unedited in real time. Even Caddyshack, if you go online, you can poke around and find unedited takes of, especially the Bill Murray Chevy Chase scene, and it's not that tight, and nor should it be. They were in there looking for stuff, finding stuff, multiple takes and everything. But boy, live improv like that, when it's just I mean, you better be funny beat to beat or keep it moving, otherwise it gets like the movie you guys talked about earlier. I gotta go.
Well, so you have Bill Murray, Chevy Chase to I believe a pretty similar extent. They were Chicago-based improvisational comedians.
Yes.
I think they both were.
Yes.
Right, and that is the culture that Michael's pulled SNL from. Was this improvisational comedy happening?
Second
Belushi,
City,
yeah.
all the Second
Belushi,
City,
Gilda Radner, like just really most of those early cast members were coming out of
Second City, yeah.
Yeah. What eventually turned to the Groundlings and then gave birth to like UCB.
UCB, sure.
And then, but in this movie, there's also Rodney. There's also like that's stand-up comedy. That is very different.
Absolutely.
And like as yourself as a stand-up comedian, this is a very open-ended question, but like, what's your view of the interrelationship between these things, between this improv culture and this stand-up culture, and what happens when we see them smashed together in a movie like this? It's really interesting, because one thing is there's not a lot that I remember of crossover scenes between these two types of comedy.
That's a really good point, actually, and it's an interesting question. You don't normally see, improv-based anything, TV or film is its own thing, and then stand-up comedy, you think of the multicam sitcom where you put the comedians, surround them with good actors so they can prop that person up, and everyone makes a joke. You're right, you don't see the integration of the two often, and I don't know if it's helped that Rodney, as we say, there was an antagonistic relationship between Rodney, who was the stand-up guy, and, say Ted Knight, who was a scripted, talented actor, versus, that's a really good question, because they do meld nicely, and I wonder if it's because everyone was at odds, that it's, I'm the improv guy, I'm fighting with the stand-up guy, who's fighting with the actor, who... I don't know. It's
like it kind of sets the movie up for this like multi or like infinite generational appreciation, right? Because that sort of nightclub like vibe that you get from Rodney, you might have part of the audience that's like, oh, this is amazing, and then this sort of cutting edge, like, what are they going to do next? This is so real. Like, is that a real blunt that they're smoking? Like, what's happening?
It sounds like Ramis was able to set the right atmosphere. He somehow set the right atmosphere where these people felt like they could do what they were there to do.
Their thing, yeah. I think you're right. And I guess, to his credit, you're right. They made them all comfortable and gave them room to run. But you're right. I never thought of that. They really are some of the best at their game, doing what they do all autonomously, but it works together.
Yeah, you basically said this. You have like an improvisational comedy, you have the stand-up thing, and then this original movie underneath all of this,
all that, yeah,
which is just character actors playing their part and like propping it up, right? Like, we keep bringing up Ted Knight, who is just like should be as celebrated as any of these people. Is like it is hard to play such a stodgy, douchey, like and it helps that his name like just call him Judge, right? Like,
right.
You're just like, oh god, this guy,
Yeah.
But like you need that straight man. And that's just another like takeaway from me is like the importance of a believable straight man and foil to your ridiculous characters. Because if that's weak and like over the top or like unbelievable, then like the absurdity of people rebelling against it, like it's just, like, you know what I mean, like Chevy Chase just being this like completely drunk golf savant against an unbelievable foil is like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
But
when you think about the straight man, I mean, Ted Knight, how big and colorful his character was. I mean, what a straight man to have and yet still be believable. And that guy was over the top. It would be tough to find an actor these days who could play that role, like you say, so true and believably, yet being so big and so just, I don't know if that's the right word. Rodney was big, but he was just, I mean, boy, oh boy. That's the straight man. You're in good shape.
So Michael, who do you like, you know, when you watch comedy? I just watched the Sarah Silverman thing on Netflix. I thought it was hilarious.
I just watched it too,
and she's a like a New York comedian. I mean, do you think of yourself as a New York comedian?
Yeah, I do, only in that this is where I started and came up with comedy and still do it. So from that point of view, yes. And it depends how you define New York comedy.
where were you doing comedy? Like what part of town were you in?
All wherever they let me on stage. You tell me. I have a subway card.
Yeah, you were like some of the interviews. Like I was just the Village. Like that's like the kind of club that's playing now.
No, not at all. Exactly, and that's a good distinction. You know, some people are just downtown. They're alternative comedian. They're this, they're that. Anywhere you would let me on stage, and I always believed the more crowds the more rooms I could do, the better. Because I wanted to make multiple crowds laugh, to be commercial. So, and that brings me to my point. So, some New York comics, I would say New York comedy is. Depends how you define it, but about the work and about getting funnier. There's a great competitive, healthy spirit about New York comedians, and I think it exists in the improv world, in the stand-up world, where you want to be funny and smart and better, and you see someone who's really good, and it motivates you. You say, oh gosh, I want to be that good. That to me was always what New York comedy was about doing the work. You could argue, New York comedy is, cerebral, Sarah Silverman versus Dane Cook, that kind of thing, and that's a different, definition, but at the same time, I always wanted to be funny in the Midwest. I knew the secret to having some success, being able to travel and make a little money in the business was going to be making a lot of people laugh. And so, there are times where I'll do a joke where I die a little inside, but I know it's going to, I know, the people in Iowa are laughing. So, and they'll play my stuff on Sirius XM. So,
this Trump guy, he's got a lot of good ideas.
Right? What's the deal with this Golden Corral? But yes. But I still live here. I mean, I've been doing it. I quit my job 18 years ago to become a comedian, and and here we are.
So what do you got coming up?
I'll be in Vegas. I go on the road again Friday. I'll be on the road for 2 months. When big Vegas, the MGM in Vegas will be the first week of August. That's always fun. And I'm actually going to record, I think, my new album there. It will be my 4th album.
Wow. Cool.
If it's ready. That's 4 or 5 weeks away. And as of being on stage last night, I can tell you I'm not sure it's ready. I put out an album last year, and then I just said, all right, give yourself a deadline. Why don't you do another full album in 1 year? See if you can do that. Because that's the hot thing to do. Carlin and all these guys would kick out an hour a year, sometimes every 2 years. And so I tried it.
Carlin.
Yeah.
I saw him at the Starbucks at 53rd and Broadway or something.
Did you really?
Yeah, and I heheard that
not recently.
No, this is about 10 years ago, and I heard it. I heard that voice. I want a cup of ice with no tea and a cup of tea with no ice. And I couldn't stand it. I just had to, I wasn't going to, do the fan thing as much as I wanted to, just because it was, just like, let the guy get his stuff, but man, it was, it sent shivers through me. I couldn't believe it. I was just, like, that moment will, hopefully that'll be like the last thing I think about when I die.
Can I ask a question I have about comedy albums? Is what's the process of coming up with the title? Because normally it's not like based in like a specific joke. It's like this comedy albums have very like kind of it's this whole milieu of ideas that's in there. How do you come up with a title for an album?
Writing a title is way easier and more fun than writing jokes. So I have 27 titles written for that. I'll sit there and just think of fun, attractive, cool titles, and that's it rather than write jokes. I put out 3 albums, and I have like my next 50 titles. But and that's absolutely true because like what are you gonna call it? Because then it makes you feel good. I try to have like some sort of insight or I try to have it mean something about what I'm working on. Like this next one's going to be called Otherwise Engaged, and it means a lot to me because rather than commit to a relationship, I gave up on 2 or 3 awesome women to commit to this career, and so otherwise I would be engaged if I hadn't done this. Also, a lot of the jokes were written on Twitter, and I worked them out on social media, so it meant something to me. Like literally, I was otherwise engaged, as most people are these days. They're not. They're looking down. They're not talking to people. So for me, I tried to come up with a title that just sort of had some meaning. But otherwise, I don't know how people do it. I think also there's that commercial element. You just want it to sound, especially in this day and age where you got to get people's attention, catch them, hook them in some way. You know, you almost just want to put like a naked woman on the cover and just, the album has nothing to do with it, but everyone's like, oh, what's this about?
Yeah.
But that was my process.
The social media thing that's so interesting. Like my friends in comedy are like clearly workshopping stuff on Twitter, which I then have seen on stage.
Yeah.
Like, do you have a relationship with that? You alluded to it a little bit.
Definitely. It's apples to oranges. You know, a joke on Twitter, so in print is different. It's just not the same. Sometimes people go, "Oh, it's so funny, you should do it on stage," and it's a different muscle. You can't just get up and say something that you wrote because sometimes it's funny in print. It's just different. But that said, I think there's a germ of some stuff. In fact, the show that you just came to, there's a germ of there's something in there that's funny. So if it got a laugh on Twitter or it did well on social media, I think you can look inside and go, okay, well, what was it about that joke? And is there a version of it that would work on stage? Because clearly it struck a chord with people. But my dad's so funny because my dad's retired, so he's taken a large interest in my career, which is so adorable and lovely. But sometimes,
I mean, that would really stress me out.
So he started emailing me comedy bits, and there's just not like I went to the supermarket today, and why are there so many onions? And I'll be like, Dad, what's the punchline? He goes, that's the punchline. That's it, So I said, well, it's not really. You need And then he's taken to look at my Twitter, and he's pieced together comedy scripts for me based on my tweets. He'll just like cut them together. See, these are all about clothing right here. So you just say them in a row. I was like, well, that's not really how it works, Dad.
He's just making a playlist.
Yeah, it's kind of what he does. So, yes. But you see people online all the time testing material, and I guess it's there's value in it. But
it's a little focus group that we all have access to.
Yeah, but it's not a shortcut. Like there's nothing like getting on stage and telling a joke. There's no other. And having done this for the last year, this album I'm working on, and no matter how much I sit there and stare at a page or walk around my apartment saying the words out loud, there's nothing like being live on a stage and having the people go yay or nay, and a lot of nays.
Yeah, I think that people tend, because everybody's like, oh yeah, I got a new joke. You want to hear this joke? I think that people really underestimate the craft and the effort that it goes into crafting a good joke.
Absolutely,
it's a lot of work.
Well,
and the timing, and then segueing from one joke into another, and then having like a little filler joke to get you to the next joke, and all that stuff.
Bring the people on a journey.
There's a lot to it.
Is to get back to Rodney Dangerfield. It was my first album, and my first comedian love was Rodney Dangerfield. But at the time, I thought it was just silliness. He was just making making noises. And now that I do it and I go and listen to his stuff, I mean, he was a master craftsman. And it looks silly because he's talking about his doctor, Dr. Viddy Boombots, and you're like, oh, this is just a silly man. But no, man, when you look at the work he did, and like you say, the timing, the rhythms, the wordsmith, I mean, the whole thing, it's a real craft to it. And he was a master at it, yeah. But he just looks silly.
If I could plug a random thing right now, it's Norm Macdonald's autobiography.
Yeah.
And he reads it, the audiobook of it himself, and he talks about his mentor, Rodney Dangerfield. So his autobiography is just full of shit. Like, he's like, it's obviously lying. But he talks about his mentor, Rodney Dangerfield, and he's like, everyone loved Rodney, and he had such a successful career that anyone would envy, but I got to know the real Rodney when he was my mentor, and he told me things he never told anyone else, that despite all of his success and everyone praising him in all of his movies, no one respected Rodney. And then he tells like 10 Rodney jokes as if they're just like real tragic stories.
I love it. Norm is just an absolute hoot, man. That guy doesn't care. He just does what he wants. Laugh, don't laugh. I think he almost enjoys it if you don't laugh. He just does. My favorite Rodney joke is I lent my friend $10,000 for plastic surgery. Now I don't know what the hell he looks like. Oh, man, one of a kind.
Well, it's been such a pleasure having Michael Somerville on the show. Guys, check out your social media. Chase down Michael Somerville on Facebook and Twitter and wherever you can.
Yeah, what are your accounts? What are you on the different things? How do we follow you?
Man, everything. Yeah, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff. Somerville, Michael. If you go to michaelsomerville.com, it's got the links to all of it.
Cool.
I'm trying to keep up with all that stuff.
Somerville with one M.
One M,
and two L's.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's the way. Well, thanks so much for being on the show. Thank you all so much for listening. Please visit colesmithy.com where you can see all of our podcasts and you'll see the photo that we are just about to take.
Yes.
With Michael Somerville. And you can pledge your support to us through Patreon. And please remember to turn your cell phones off. Just fucking turn your cell phones off, goddammit.
Doing anything. Especially
throw it at the wall. Break that piece of shit.
If you're
leave the house without your cell phone. I do it all the time. It's okay. You can do it.
If you're in the middle of surgery as the patient or the surgeon, turn it off. Do us a favor.
You leave without. How do you get home?
The Metro card. Come on, you already know that. The subway card. I got that.
That's all you need.